You never want to find yourself out on the water fishing without the essentials. So it's best to always pack a Columbia PFG Solar Stream Elite hoodie to protect against the sun. I mean, it provides great protection and it's really breathable so you don't get hot. That's a win-win. Columbia PFG has a lot of great gear. So before you head out on the water, head over to Columbia.com/PFG to shop their performance fishing gear.
If you're 21 years old and use nicotine or tobacco, I'm here to tell you about Black Buffalo and how it's redefining tradition for millions of adult consumers. So if you're over 21, consume nicotine or tobacco, and want to join the Black Buffalo herd, head over to blackbuffalo.com to learn more. Warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. Black Buffalo products are intended for adults aged 21 and older who are consumers of nicotine or tobacco.
It's time to get inside the Giants Huddle.
Let's go, let's go, let's go.
On Giants.com.
I like it, I like it.
And the Giants mobile app.
Boom, give me some juice.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's roll.
Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast, all brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. I am John Schmeelk. We're joined from NFL Network, the one and only Cynthia Frelund, who we determined last time she was on at the Combine is officially the analytics queen, is what we landed on for your title, I think. Are you still good with that?
I think that's a good one. I mean,
Math queen, do you like that better? No?
I think it's a good one. Like I feel like there should be some mathy word in there. Like I got to figure out like a good math word, but queen will do for now. In the meantime, we can just go with queen. It's fine.
All right. So we're going to warn our viewers before we start here. If you like offensive line and you like math and nerdum, you're going to love the next 20 minutes or so, because we're going to dig deep into this. And we kind of touched on it when we spoke in Indianapolis at the Combine, Cynthia. We decided to reconnect to do something a little bit longer on it, because I thought it was fascinating. Let's start with the origin story first on how you kind of got onto this study of offensive linemen and how you evaluate them.
Well, I know that everyone listening knows that the Combine is the best event of the entire football calendar. It's not just like, not because it's really predictive of too much from the standpoint of like, what your exact 40 time is, et cetera. But you do get to connect with absolutely everyone in the league. And Russ Grimm, he used to be a Washington player and at the time was a Tennessee Titans offensive line coach. He told me that there was nothing analytics would ever do that would be of interest to him. He said a little more harshly because that's how Russ talks. I didn't take it personal, but he was like, there's nothing you could ever talk about with the numbers that would ever be interesting to me, right? So I then decided that the subject of my master's thesis at Northwestern, and you can go Google how much that cost, would be measuring offensive linemen to see if there was anything that could be predictive about college level play transferring to the NFL in terms of, waist bender. So basically unfavorable leverage. So, who's going to get smoked and let your quarterback get smoked, or who has a better chance at the next level to be a guy who can be a brick wall that your quarterback will appreciate standing behind.
Now, one of your colleagues, Sean O'Hara, has tried to teach me how to evaluate offensive line play, right? And one thing, you're right, he always talks to me about is guys that bend at the waist, which they lose all their leverage and lose their balance. When you're talking to Russ Grimm, what were some of the reasons he gave you for why that specific factor was so important when evaluating offensive line play?
Yeah. So we talked about, your ankle flexion, your knee flexion, your hip flexion, your lower back bend, so your sacral spine's ability to withstand pressure, and your ability to lift your hands up in time. And then how does it work going laterally left to right? Because you can imagine and these are big humans, right? Your center of gravity is different. It's in a different spot if your hands are down than if they're up, and how you're standing. So some people have different stances to begin with, and they teach it different ways. Very, very interesting part. But your ankle flexion, so how your ankle can bend, your knee flexion, obviously how much your knees can bend, and your hips. So I went and spent a lot of time with a bunch of exercise science specialists at, doctors, kinesiologists, all these people who understand movement, to talk about hamstrings. I learned more about knees, hamstrings, calves, quads, your hip flexors, your psoas, all of these things, groins, all a groin pull for an O lineman, totally bigger deal than maybe people think about, because of the way it aligns your hips and allows you to block a defender that's coming your way. So I spent a lot of time with those people, spent a lot of time with my true statistical professors who are like, they can go show me what's causal versus just correlated, right? And how to determine. So like, we also had like R squared values. We're getting nerdy here. Like you said nerdy, we're going nerdy.
Well, we're in.
But basically how much something actually is related to the outcome. So, there's a certain amount of something input that is related to output, and you want it to be of enough relevance so that you can say that this is actually related to an outcome that you're seeing on the field.
Absolutely. And I guess before we get into some of the details on how you measured some of this stuff, I got to imagine the reason this is so important is that this doesn't sound like something that's coachable, teachable, or trainable. A lot of that is just kind of how your body is built and how your body works, right? So this isn't something a guy can necessarily improve. You either kind of have it or you don't, and that sets your kind of baseline level of how good of a player you can be.
Fair. And the other way to think of it too is in college. So the interesting part about the college data that was a little challenging at first was you grow up in college. And some guys come to college at 17, some come at 19, some are, everyone remembers growing up, late bloomers, early bloomers. I went to college with Matthias Kiwanuka, who grew like 3 inches in college. Like That's a ridiculous thing to have happen and be able to accurately measure. So a lot of it is forecasting where they are in their growth because I focused on, all right, we're becoming increasingly a passing league. So I narrowed my research down on just passing downs, and I used tackles and guards. I left center play out of it, mostly because I use computer vision. It's very hard. At that point, it was hard to code in the computer vision for the center. So, but I was okay with that. So were my professors. And then we, looked at body change, like changing body types and how that it's wild. An offensive lineman in college coming in to when they're done in a very top tier program that has the right health and nutrition, all of the different, the strength and conditioning coaches, et cetera, that's going to be a different outcome than a guy who didn't go to quite as formidable of a school and is now going to a place like the Giants where you're going to get all the things that you need and then probably change during your rookie year quite a bit. So so you're right. Like it's kind of like my analogy is this. My body type will never select for me dunking a basketball. I am 5'6". Like I do not have that kind of vertical disposition. So my ability to jump, like any of that. But when I played volleyball, I was an outside hitter. So I had to accommodate the fact that I was never going to jump as high as the middle by changing my angle, going different weights. I did work on my vertical quite a bit, but my ceiling would never going to be that high. So the difference is how do you optimize then how do you kind of forecast where that ceiling is and then give the people who are in charge of that stuff the tools to say, this is how we can get Joe Alt's a really good one, the left tackle that's now a Charger. He's very young. He was born in 2002. So he's going to be 22 this year, which means he could or could not be done growing. Trent Williams is done growing, right? Like these are things we know. He could put on more muscle, et cetera, but we don't know if maybe it's declining. You never know, right? So the interesting part there is trying to find that ceiling and then optimizing to get as close to it as possible.
All right, I was going to ask this later, but since you mentioned it, you said you did most of your testing for pass pro, right? As you've gone into this a little bit deeper, have you noticed any correlation between guys that maybe waist bend in the business? A lot of time in the run game, the lunging, trying to run block becomes an issue. Does that eventually, give you a hint that, well, maybe against better pass rushers, that could become a problem in pass pro too? Have you found that as you've moved forward past your dissertation and your research?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, obviously, for master thesis, you get like a year to write it. And so I had to narrow it down somewhere. Otherwise, we were going to fill the ocean, right? And then in subsequent years, because I didn't graduate yesterday, I have actually gone back and followed up in the run game. And then I also measured for centers as well, because my ability to code using computer vision was better. But again, if we're only focusing on what came out of this one specific thesis, that's where again, you got your own school, you had to narrow it down somewhere. So, but I have noticed that it's actually not dissimilar in the run game, especially outside zone runs, which are runs that sort of mimic where a pass and the amount of time that a pass could take placed. So that is actually a really keen observation, because this year we saw the pendulum sort of swing back where those A gaps, so like the run between the center on either side of the center, those were actually working a lot better this year, because a lot of people have focused their defensive attack on outside zone runs, which were all the rage. And now we're going back to like ISO, duo, like things your high school did when you played high school football, right? So, but it's a lot of that has to do also, like, you know, the O linemen are being asked to do different things again. So it's very interesting. And the more versatile you are, the better that is going to work for you with a compressed formation versus, you know, the Bills play a very spread formation, and like the Niners play a very compressed formation. Obviously, it works better to run power, duo, whatever you want to call it, in that compressed formation, because you're not asking the guard and tackle to do the same things as you are in a spread formation like the Bills. Anyways, that's a lot, but yeah.
So you mentioned...
the answer is yes. I have expanded it past that thesis.
Got it. So you mentioned computer vision. Explain how you measure waist bending and, you know, hand placement and stuff like that, and actually get numbers. So it's not just eye tests, and you're actually getting data that you can use for your measurements.
So it's hockey season right now. Most of your listeners are probably Rangers fans, right?
Yep.
You know that when you're watching and the billboards on the rink change to different commercials, or even in the ice, that's actually all computer vision. It's not there, you know that, right? Like, we all know this. My friends get fascinated when I tell them, I'm like, when you're actually there, like, they say different things. It's totally different advertising. It's nowhere near as clean because they all get beat up. Like, if that were a video monitor, that whole thing would be ruined in like one check into the wall. But
yeah, and in baseball stadiums, you have the green screen behind the catcher. So when you're there, it looks like a green screen, but they project onto it when you're watching the game.
Exactly. So that's all the same. It's in the yellow line in football. So, you know, the first down marker, which hilariously, I have had friends be like, that is not there in real life. I'm like, no. I'm like, it would actually probably be helpful if they could figure it out somehow, but no, it is not there. So it's the same idea. You use an overlay of a video framework to measure differences in colors. So the way it kind of works is, you know, you can select for different points. So you take the all 22, which is a fixed screen. So the only things that's like, when you're watching football, you're watching several different cameras at once, but like, cause the director will be like, take this one, you'll see different angles. But in the all 22, it's fixed. So everything is the same. You can tell the computer vision to show me white lines versus green grass, or, you know, a blue uniform versus the green grass versus the white line. And then you can select points on it. Say, this is a hip, this is a knee. And this is actually an application of AI, because what you're doing is you're taking lots and lots and lots and lots of films so that the computer vision learns, this is a knee, this is an ankle, this is a foot, this is a bum, this is a low back, this is a hip, like shoulder, like, so you actually learn over time. I have to go through and watch to make sure that it doesn't hallucinate where it use AI works. It doesn't, you know, think a knee is a hand or whatever, but you can get it pretty close. Now, will I say do I stand by the absolute number of each one? No, I don't know the exact, like, you know, is it 50, you know, your dorsiflexion, which is you bring your ankle back towards your shin, that's dorsiflexion. Like, does your dorsiflexion, is it 15.173 degrees or is it 14.78? I don't like the exact, but I do know that relatively the second number is a tighter angle than the first number, right? So it is relatively correct. It is not like, I don't stand by the absolute number as like the Bible, right? Because it's on a patchwork of, you know, the pixelation can be different from 10 years ago. We were watching different pixelation than even now. So yes, so you can see the trends and you can see the relative values really clearly, but the absolute values can sometimes be a little off.
And all you want to do is going to be able to compare one player to another, right?
Exactly.
So that's basically
abouts. Right. Abouts.
What's up? I'm John Wall.
And I'm CJ Toledano, and we're starting a new podcast presented by DraftKings called Point Game. We're now joined by 3-time NBA Sixth Man of the Year, elite bucket getter. Let's please welcome Jamal Crawford to Point Game. King of the Court one-on-one tournament. If they had it back in your prime, do you think you could have took it all?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think I could have took it all. But I think I would have shocked a lot of people. I think Kobe and everybody in their prime, Kobe would win a one-on-one contest.
Yeah, because you got to think he's going to guard. He don't care about guarding.
He's gonna guard.
He's going
Exactly.
guard. Like, you see him in the Olympics, he's going guard. And then on
I'm
top
not
of that,
guarding like that, CJ.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sam Cassell to Point Game.
I remember you came in my room crying, tears, crying. I mean, he was in a culture shock. And then he's going through withdrawals about winning.
remember what I told you? I said, OG, you think I can get paid and go back and play in college? You think ain't it?
Check out Point Game with John Wall and CJ Toledano on the iHeartRadio app, DraftKings YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Right.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New you moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Giants Huddle podcast, by the way, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day to every day, Citizens is made ready for Giants fans with insights, guidance, and solutions. Learn more at citizensbank.com. All right, so when you did your measurements, what ended up becoming most predictive for you? And how predictive really was it when you kind of did all your measurements and then you were able to see how players ended up performing, which is great because you did this so many years ago. Now you can actually see how these guys ended up performing after you made your predictions, right?
Yep. So the two things, if you wanted to shortcut it, you just wanted to, you're like, Cynthia, this is a ridiculous number of like, what are two things I should look for just to narrow it down? The two things you should look for are, number one, the first 10 split of your 40. So getting up out of the 40 stance, which there's a specific, you can go watch it. It's not the speed you're looking for. Who cares? It's the stance to the first 10. Can you keep your bum down? Can you keep your hips down low enough and stay in range with your knee and your ankle? So if you were falling forward, that wouldn't be the right thing. If you could trick my algorithm by walking like a duck and not moving through it, but going really slow, which is not the intention of the 40. So you have to keep the same intention, which is speed. So your burst and that first 10, can you keep your bum down within, and the best guys, almost irrespective of height, they don't come up more than 1.5 inches. Wild. And it is wildly accurate to where they end up in the league.
Wait, you mean from their starting position on their all fours, from when they get into their sprint position, their bums don't go up more than 1.5 inches?
When they cross the line. So some people start in a lower spot, but when your bum crosses the line, so your hands up the line to start. So when your bum crosses the line, some people have a lower start, whatever, and some people have a higher start. It like your height does have something to do with that.
Sure.
But by the time it goes across, so pretend there's a wall at the starting line and a wall at the 10, 1.5 inches those are what the elite guys do.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
And we're talking like you can see it when you zoomed in on that, but you can see it. And then that's how, what I did backwards to make sure these coaches would agree with me was I had them rank in 5 distinct buckets: elite, above average, average, below average, well below average. So these are you have to do odd numbers. You can't do even numbers. That's just the way the math works. And then this part here has to be of 75% or whatever, 80% of your sample. So you're actually getting elite. People say, they throw that word around a lot. We're talking about really elite. Taylor Lewan, he was probably the prototype of what you want your, watch his if you can go on NFL.com and watch his 40. You can actually see it there that he's really special at doing that. He's the prototype of it. So that's a good one reference point wise.
Okay, so that's the first one. What's the second shortcut?
The second shortcut is in your college film. So this one's harder to watch for, but you can kind of get relative numbers. Your ability to move left and right without lifting your bum up is in a throwing situation. It actually translates well to rushing down as well, but it's not as predictive because there's some scheme involved in that. If you're pulling a guard, you're just going to have just a dip. It throws things off a little bit, but in a straight drop back, I don't care if it's 5, 7, I don't care how many steps back you're going, your ability to laterally move in a straight dropping, a passing down when the defense knows that it's a pass.
Now this is interesting, and I'm going to try to boil this down to a simple point, and you can yell at me if you think I'm wrong.
No.
I'm teaching my 7-year-old, my 6-year-old flag football, right? And
Love it.
you know, these kids have no idea what they're doing. So we say on defense, get in your athletic position. Well, what's your athletic position?
Yep.
It's getting with your knees bent and your bum down, because you can create, you know, you can create balance. You can move
Yep.
left or right, forward or back, and keep your balance. And it seems like, you know, the more I've kind of done the scouting thing, and not just offensive line, but everything, Cynthia, you want guys that what I kind of term are natural athletes. And it's kind of
Yep.
hard to, you know, put numbers on those, but a lot of times it's multi-sport guys, right? Guys that play basketball, they know how to get into a defensive stance in basketball, move side to side, left to right. And even there are some guys that, and you see this when they test well, they just don't move fluidly and naturally. So I feel like kind of what you're trying to do here by getting these numbers is figuring out what guys can move fluidly and naturally, keep their balance. Even if the numbers aren't great, if they're doing it within their own athleticism, that will lead to better results, because you can deal with another person's elite athleticism if you can really control your own body in a really powerful way. Is that fair?
Very fair. And the other thing is it captures your ability to lift your hands up and start pushing. So the ideal situation, if you want to stop a defender, you're best if you're facing towards them with your arms out, right? Think about it. That's your athletic stance, but going forward, the kinetic energy goes this way, right? So it's coming at the defender. If you are already on your heels, or if you are to the right and they are to the left, etc., you can get smoked, right? Your quarterback can get smoked pretty easily. So getting into that spot is actually another form of being an athlete, meaning, you know, being able to see the angle and adjust. That's why sometimes those swim moves, like we talk about bull rushers versus like what kind of pass rusher are you, right? Like if I'm coming, if Myles Garrett just destroys souls, he doesn't even need to do a swim move, right? Aaron Donald had that nasty swim move. That was he was just a better athlete than many guards that he was going up. That just was. They were actually in a favorable position. Their hips were actually pretty much aligned with his. The more my hips line up with your hips and my hands are out, the better my chances are for me. That works with your eye test, but the math bears that out as well. So if you can get your hands up and into that athletic stance laterally, that also predicts for not being a waist bender. Right?
Yeah, and I got to imagine, right? This is just being able to be prepared for whatever moves the defensive player throws at you, right? So if they bull rush you, you can't get pushed back because you're balanced. You're not back on your heels, and then you're going to get put on your rear end, right? But then again, if you think they're going to bull rush you, you lean forward. They do like the Von Miller's ghost move, the swim. You're lunging forward. They get around you. So it's just a matter of you're trying to measure how these guys are able to keep their center of gravity, no matter how they're trying to move left or right, front or back. But
if I'm spin moving, swim moving, it actually does take extra time. So while it might be an effective move, that actually if I'm a left tackle, very important tackle. Oh, by the way, right tackle wise, Penei Sewell. That guy's pretty much the prototype too. Like I feel like I never say anything nice about the Lions, but like that guy is pretty much a prototype as well. So I'm from Michigan. I'm allowed to say that. So, but like long story short, like you're a Penei Sewell and a guy's coming at you. If you have to spin move to get out of my grip, that's okay, because that means Jared Goff then had about an extra second to deal with whatever's coming. And those seconds are huge, as we know. So makes a big difference.
No, absolutely. And I'll get to something else that Sean O'Hara always talked to me about. And you talked about syncing up your hips with your hands, right? He always talks about being a boxer and not a gunslinger, right? He hates the guys that have their hands down at the waist. They kind of bring them up, because you're not then punching and you lose you exactly. and a lot of times the guys, what they'll do too, when they bring them down low, they'll bring them around and they'll hug, right? They won't bring them up and they won't punch. They'll come around and they'll go outside and they'll hug. So that does to you, when you've done your measurements, your ability to get your hands in the right place also has to do with your ability to bend at the knees and not bend at the waist. Those things are all interconnected in terms of body mechanics.
It's almost impossible to take the hands and the hips out of the equation. So like, because if my hands are down, like fatigue is something I've recently added. So the ability, what do you do in the fourth quarter versus what do you do in the first quarter? Ideally in the first quarter, you are not fatigued. In the fourth quarter, you're more fatigued. Are you more or less? Like what happens? Are you trending at the same place as your defender, or are you like, because if you can see if a team's really tired, like what happens. So your hands don't get up as fast, etc. So it's almost impossible to get your hands and your hips not sink. Like it's very hard to be like, well, he got his hips up, but if your hands are still down, it stinks. If your hands are up and your hips are too high, also a fail. So it's very hard to have those two. So that's why I added in fatigue later, because that was an area where, like, if, you see a lot of guys with their hands on their hips coaches hate that, like hate it. And it's not just because they're like in a posture that's bad body language. It's also because you're actually, like, if your hips are down here and you're leaning like this, you're not ready. Right. Like, and maybe that's a signal to a defender that you're not going to get, like, to be able to get in your stance or out of your stance as soon as the ball snaps. So that is an interesting, it's just an interesting, especially if you somehow have your hands on your hips, like right before the play starts. This is more tight ends have more of this, but like, you're like, oh my God, like this isn't good. This isn't good at all. So look for that.
And what I've seen and what coaches always tell me too, is that what they hate seeing is guys on the ground. Right. And I imagine this is directly real, right? The guys that are on the ground a lot are the ones that end up bending at the waist a lot. You're leaning forward and you fall, right?
You're leaning forward and you fall, or you are getting pushed and then you try to go low, because we have this idea, low man wins, right? And it's not wrong. Although low man doesn't win if one of your knees is on the ground. So low man wins, but like, it's kind of like the opposite of the limbo, right? Like, you're not allowed to touch the floor. Of course you could crawl under it, right? It's like, you got to be low man wins, but you can't be in the dirt. That's also how you hurt yourself. Like if you're always in the ground, you get hurt more often. It's a little like, I watch it now and I'm like, oh no, get up, your ACL. You need that ACL. So yeah.
Yeah, trust me, being here with Tom Coughlin for 10 years, him yelling off the ground during practice was probably the most common thing he yelled at people during training camp and OTH practice. Keep guys healthy. How does this correlate to size? You talk about ideal size for an offensive tackle, right? Do taller guys have trouble doing this stuff versus shorter guys? Is there an ideal thing you're looking for, or is it just a matter of how good of an athlete a guy is?
It depends on what you're asked to do. So a good example, obviously, Giants fans they know more about the Bills, right? So if you look to see the way the Bills are constructed, the Bills are interesting because Dion and their right tackle, Spencer Brown's like 6'8". He's a huge man. He starts in a very high stance, but they're also spreading them way out because Josh Allen wants to run. So they're adapting what's being asked of them. So they figured out their interior offensive line a lot better, this past season. That's what works for them. It really just has to match. So you can, obviously we'd all like to build our offensive lines with 5 of or 7, 2 that could rotate, of the most nastiest men on the planet, but there just aren't that many, right? Like it's really hard to have an elite 5-person O-line, right? So the reality is you have to sacrifice somewhere. So bigger isn't always better, because Spencer can get crushed. He has had back issues. You've seen it. Dion's a little bit more reliable from that. Dion is one of the best, I would say, like relative to his quarterback, meaning for what his quarterback needs. Dion Dawkins is one of the best left tackles that we don't talk about as being like truly high up there in terms of his production, but he does exactly what his quarterback needs. Right. So it might not work if you threw him on the Lions, because Jared Goff is a much different quarterback than Josh Allen. So it's a little bit tailored to what you are trying to do. But for the most part, you want to be in a threshold. You want to be there's a range that's about right. And you want to be in the range or not so dramatically outside the range that whatever the strategy is, you are not well suited for.
So is there such thing as being too tall in terms of like losing a lot of your leverage?
Yeah. I mean, often the very, very tall players on the O-line, you'll see back issues. You'll see it's harder to get the low man wins leverage, right? Like they're often not constructed with, you kind of want a thicker bump, and sometimes taller tackle, like Spencer Brown is not as like thickly based as some other right tackles, right? So, and that can change your ability to get upended by a defensive end or your ability to laterally move. But again, 6'8" is very, very big.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Absolutely. Giant fans love a winner. It's why they love Citizens. Named the 2022 best bank in the U.S. by the Bankers, the official bank of the Giants and sponsor of the Huddle. Citizens is made ready for fans of Big Blue. Learn more at citizensbank.com. Is there a difference for guards and tackles, Cynthia? Should guards be a little bit more, I don't know, refrigerator body type, where they're a little bit stouter, a little bit more compact as opposed to tackles?
The guard can have less of a stature, meaning they don't need to be as tall. It's better for, I mean, ideally your tackles will be taller than your guards. Okay. But like, they need to be better at handling multiple pressures coming from multiple directions, especially down after down. Your right tackle or your left tackle is going to have similarly, like, not as many people coming at them in different directions. Remember, they get hit from not just straight, but like left and right. And so your tackle, they push you to the outside. You try to push a guy to the outside. So you favor one side, whereas a guard, you actually need to hold pretty stout. You have to have more of those quick burst muscle fibers that allow you to hold to the right and then the left and then the right, like that a little bit longer than, whereas a tackle, it's the same person that you hold as you. So the twitch is more about it, not the quick versus slow twitch muscle fibers is a little more about it than the specific, is your size more like a refrigerator? Just tends that those two things tend to go together.
That makes sense. And I guess you already kind of answered this with your 10-yard split and your lateral movement questions. So maybe the answer is both.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at some of these combine results, you talked about the 10-yard split and the 40. In terms of where the bum is, I'm sure the time matters a little bit too in some respect. You have the jumps, which measured explosive. Then you have the shuttles and the lateral stuff. Is it different based on where you are, the system that you're in? Which are the most important numbers for you in terms of measuring those types of athletic numbers in terms of offensive linemen?
The thing that my data found was that the 3-cone shuttle, those things that we like to look at, they help clarify what you're seeing. They're not wildly predictive unless you're out of range.
Okay.
So if you're very far out of range, something's wrong, or your film in college was not using your, I don't think if I've ever seen someone have like just bullet, like it's not like the 40 where you can see someone just be a burner and then they don't look as fast on the field. It's kind of like, it helps clarify, especially if you're playing against a lower level of competition, right? If you're not at this Power 5 school or whatever we're going to call these schools now with conference realignment, So I don't even know,
I think we're down to now. Or I think there are 3 big, whatever it is now. 3.
If you're not at the good schools playing the good defenders, I don't even know what to say anymore. Like this, I would never be sidebar. I would never handle being a college coach because re-recruiting your players with this transfer portal seems like the worst. Like
ever.
Bless
worst thing
anyone
ever.
who wants to do that. It's the worst idea. Anyways, so that being said, unless your film shows, like if you're playing in like a MAC school and you want to see does this check out, like a good approximate that could make you feel better, but it's not super predictive, unfortunately. Not the number, right? Like you can see some of the mechanics, especially coming back from an injury. The mechanics are something you could watch to see, like, do you have good flexion? Can you move? But the actual speed of it is negligible.
Should we care about jumps?
I think you should care about jumps. I think more for guards than for tackles, mostly because what would be a better version? And like I spend a lot of time talking to my professors about this, and then the medical people who I consulted, like if they could jump like 10 times in a row and we could see what the 10th jump is, that would be actually more predictive than it would be just a single jump.
And is that mimicking kind of firing out of your stance into the defensive tackle that's kind of lined up right in front of you, right? That's what that is?
Right. That's why I want to know your 10th one, because I have to assume your background is, you're going to the combine and you're going to specifically train for this one specific moment.
You would hope.
Right. Like I said, you have to assume. So if I'm assuming I'm going for one big old jump, I'm doing it a couple times, but if I'm doing that, like I would hope, especially these guys who have like hoops backgrounds or like even wrestling backgrounds, they could like think they could be differently put together or under, like if you were like a basketball player, you should know how to jump a little bit, right? Like who knows? So again, assumptions, but you know, I do assume that they're training for this one jump, but it would be great if they could do 10. Like if I were constructing my ideal offensive lineman workout, I would want to do 10 vertical jumps in a row, and I want to see their 10th one.
No,
that would be
sense.
my, you know, and like how it declines or what happens there.
Two other measurements people talk about a lot. Poor Olu Fashanu, people were like obsessing with his hand size this year. And like, he has little girl hands. He can't hold on to anybody. I'm like, guys, relax. I mean, calm down. And arm length. There's another thing that people make a big deal about with offensive linemen. How predictive, if at all, are those two aspects of offensive linemen? I'm
gonna make some people mad here, but we found no correlation in hand size. Absolutely none. Now, there is something to be said. I will say, like, the medical people who I talked to were saying, now, if you have, like, if over time my hand starts to get more, like, you know, my poor dad, I'm about to throw him under the bus, but my dad's not the youngest man ever. And he plays a lot of golf, and he kind of gets a little stuck because he plays the same, like his muscles get stuck in the golf position. So he can't stretch his hands as big. That actually could be an early indicator of something like carpal tunnel or another problem that's coming, but that's very, very second level. That's unnecessary. But point being is you actually have to, it'd be smart for offensive linemen to stretch their hands more. Stupid, but it would be smart for them to do that. So that could be a indicator of a problem in the future, but that's not something, I don't know. This, again, second or third level that we don't need to get into. Arm size does have an impact, mostly if they're out of range, but the range is not quite as, like, some people are like, long arms, that's great. The longer, the better. You can never get any longer. It's diminishing returns outside of a range. So, you know, as long as they're not too, and it's relative to your height, and obviously, but it's like, as long as they're not too short, you don't get a ton of extra benefits from a guy with like really long arms, unless you're like really good at using them. So you do kind of get punished if you have too short of arms, but you don't get, it's not like linear with the longer the arms, the bigger the return. That's not how it works.
What would be your threshold for offensive tackles, where if you were advising a team and they said, well, we shouldn't draft an offensive tackle with an arm length lower than what number would you give them?
Well, relative to their height, it should be like at least a little bigger than their height. So if I'm 66 inches long, I should be like, you know, there's actually, we put together, like, there's a framework. I can't remember exactly the number. It's like one at least needs to, I remember for me, if to be a good tackle, which obviously I'd be a terrible tackle, but if we're to say that, you know, that kind of thing, it's like my arms would essentially have to be 5'8", so like another inch on top. But it does get bigger as the people get bigger.
So you would look more at wingspan than arm length when you do the measurements and the comparisons.
Yep. Because your chest muscles have a lot to do with how you use your arms. So, right, like your shoulders and your chest. So if you can get a good wingspan, the amount of anatomy that it was a good thing. I actually, you know, I often say I didn't use my biology degree from BC very much. I mean, I loved BC, but like, you know, I'm like biology, like whatever, but I used it in that a lot.
I had no idea you had a biology degree. So you did the science and math thing. Like, what's next?
I'm like the most random person on the planet, you know, like I don't know what I'm doing, but yes, I'm still paying for all of it. We're good about that. But
what's up? I'm John Wall.
And I'm CJ Toledano, and we're starting a new podcast presented by DraftKings called Point Game. We're now joined by 3-time NBA Sixth Man of the Year, elite bucket getter. Let's please welcome Jamal Crawford to Point Game. King of the Court one-on-one tournament. If they had it back in your prime, do you think you could have took it all?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think I could have took it all, but I think I would have shocked a lot of people. I think Kobe and everybody in their prime, Kobe would win a one-on-one contest.
Yeah, because you got to think, he's going to guard. He don't care about guarding.
He's going to guard.
He's going to guard. Like, you see him in the Olympics, he's going to guard. And then on top of that.
I'm not guarding like that, CJ.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sam Cassell to Point Game.
I remember you came out from crying, tears, crying. I mean, he was in a culture shock. And then he's going through withdrawals about winning.
Remember what I told you? I said, OG, you think I can get paid and go back and play in college because it ain't it?
Check out Point Game with John Wall and CJ Toledano on the iHeartRadio app, DraftKings YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, we got two final kind of random things and one specific Giant thing, Cynthia, and then we'll wrap up. I really appreciate all the time.
No,
Thank
this
you
is
very much.
awesome. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, this is a ton of fun here. So we just talked about offensive linemen, right? What's the most efficient pass rush move? Because I'm sure when you study the offensive lineman, you kind of look at pass rushers too, right? You talk about the spin move takes a little bit longer.
Yep.
Is it just a straight up bull? That's the straight line. Is it the quick inside move? What's the most efficient way for a defensive player to get to the quarterback?
Having the most predictive number for a defensive player in terms of causing an actual pressure. So I define a pressure. So most quarterbacks, let's just be very top line here, around 6 feet tall, let's call it, plus or minus. So their wingspan, 6 feet, right? Around a little bit more. So I drew a 6 foot diameter circle around the quarterback, and you have 135-degree vision in your helmet mostly. And so if I can see it, then it's a pressure. If that includes my tackle being pushed into me by the defender, etc. The most predictive metric in terms of causing a pressure, be it through your own body or by pushing an offensive lineman into your quarterback, is your ability for a second push. So Cam Jordan actually is really good at this, especially a couple of years ago. He really embodied. There's a ton of Giants that are, as well as Strahan's actually good at this. A shove, wait, and that they kind of, and then you shove them again. And that is your ability to that second push. That's when the linemen lose their leverage. So it actually doesn't matter what angle it's coming from. Ideally, it would be not a bull rush is not the most effective. At least that's what we found. Way to do it, unless you're Aaron Donald against if you're unblocked, it's a different story, right? But like when you're blocked, like let's call it that. So that's if you are a blocked defender. If you're unblocked, you're going to win. No matter, like that's just, it doesn't count. So like you'd be stupid not to take a straight line somewhere, but it's the recoil.
I guess that makes sense then, right? Because at first contact, everyone's going to be able to make that initial stop, right? It's how you then put that offensive lineman off balance off that first contact. And you said a second push, right? It could also be a pull, right? The old push-pull move. You push, second move, you pull through,
I should have, that's actually a really good distinction. It doesn't need to be a push. It could be a pull. It could be a shove. It could be
swim even, right?
Anything, but it's the second. Like it's, we got my first, nope, that ain't it. Boom, second one, that whatever it is.
And that's why I guess that first, the explosiveness in that first move for a pass rush is really important, right? Because that's what kind of puts the offensive lineman off kilter. That sets up that second move, which is what actually gets you home.
Exactly. The explosiveness is the number. Like if I'm looking at this is an interesting defensive draft because obviously first 15 players were offensive picks, but it's like, well, how good of a value did the Rams get in Jared Verse? Like, what are they getting? Like, where does he rank in terms of burst and explosivity, et cetera? And it's funny because like, he kind of like is around, what do they pick? 19? Like that's kind of where compared to past drafts, like, so they, like, not to say they didn't get a great value, but like to say that this was kind of it was an interesting, right? Like offensive minded draft in general, like the return was great for that. So Brian Burns actually has a very good second effort on. So Giants fans will like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine then Daniel Jeremiah talks a lot about, and he goes back and he had the Next Gen Stats guys pull this data. And I think the Eagles players are always at the top of this list, by the way. No surprise they've had the best pass rush in the league for the last 5 or 6 years. It's get off. And it's how quickly you can get on top of that offensive tackle for an edge guy or a tackle. I imagine that's probably pretty important too, right?
Massively important. It's, like I said, it might be the number one thing. Like if you were to close your eyes and think about, that's also the difference too between, like you think about like these top end guys, that's great. But you got to think about who is better than average at that. Like the teams that tend to be better, they have guys, they do a better job of finding like the above average guys at doing something like that. Like if you were to just like I said, if you were to shorthand, like, I got to make a team in 15 minutes, like blah, 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 give me this. This is what I would pull. Not for you already know who the best passer, like, sure, I'll take Myles Garrett. Twist my rubber arm. Give me Myles Garrett, like, but it's like, you already know that, but I'm talking about the guys who like, they stand next to someone who looks like that. And you're like, oh crap. Like he's standing next to Myles Garrett. He's pretty good too. Something like that. Right. Like, so that's where you have to look that I call it burst. So your first 3 yards traveled with computer vision, it doesn't need to be straight. what happens in those 3 yards. Now, it could be holding on to an offensive player and pushing them. That one took me a lot longer to calculate, but your basically win rate at the line of scrimmage, or because some people don't start at the line of scrimmage, but when you are initially moving towards your offensive players.
Interesting. All right. Couple Giants specific things.
Yeah.
Evan Neal, he's a guy that they're trying to figure out here, right? Right tackle, maybe with him in the guard at some point, but they try him at right tackle here in the spring. Again, new offensive line coach. You know, the thing about Neal when he came out, you know, there was all these workout videos and stuff on Twitter of him doing the box jump and the splits and all that stuff, but he never actually did combine work. Never actually, right? But he never
has to do the splits on the football field.
It's amazing. But he never actually tested number-wise at the combine or a pro day coming out in college. So we never actually put numbers to what we thought was great athleticism. Now he's come in here. He's had 2 straight years where he's had leg injuries, right? So that's going to affect his knees, all sorts of stuff. He had ankle surgery this past year. That's going to affect how you move. What did you see with Evan Neal coming out when you did your analysis of him? And what should Giant fans think of him going forward, given he's only played 21 games in 2 years, which is barely more than one season. He's had all these injuries. How should Giant fans think about Evan Neal right now heading into year number 3?
The threshold for him, he's a dunker, if you know what I mean. Like, you know, back to our other analogy, the denominator for him, the capacity that he could operate at, I thought coming out very, 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 like I really loved Evan Neal. Like my stuff really liked him a lot. His 40 time was right where it needed to be for whenever you measured it. Like, obviously not the combine, but his
I know what you mean. Yeah.
So all of his numbers were like right where they needed to be, and he looked very good in a lot of different. Obviously played great level of competition, you know, and I'm confused what to expect now, because
join the club, by the way.
Yeah. Well, if we could measure his fat, I would look mostly at his, like, if you wanted to look at it through, like, with your eyes, his low back could be what you look at. You know, like if he has that good flexion, that often means his hamstrings in a good spot, and his calf. Like usually you can get, you know, the good flexion that's like, you know, you buy that thing where you're supposed to like really sit like with your low back, like the lumbar support. Like if you look like you have a lumbar support on your back, like that's how you might look, you know, when you're watching him on the field. It's almost impossible to do without game speed, but
you want to have that curve of your back kind of like going like that, right? So your butt's kind of out and your back curves back and up.
Yep. Backing up. Yep. So like one of my professors who's a little bit more colorful was like, you know, like a pinup model. And I'm like, it's actually it actually does get you to where you need to go mentally, but I don't need that calendar, you know, like Evan Neal, you know, I don't need that calendar, but you know, it actually, that's whatever. It does help. So,
and frankly, I'm not even sure the young kids know what pinup calendars are anymore, Cynthia. I don't think those are things anymore.
Well, we've just inspired a bunch of weird Google searches today. So cheers to us. Good luck, kids. Woof.
You came from math and you left with pinup models. How about that? So in short, you don't think there's anything structurally wrong with Evan Neal that physically is holding him back, that should keep him from being able to figure out how to play right tackle, basically?
Again, I'm not a doctor. I don't know. But if I'm saying based on what I saw, his capacity was coming out of college, I think his capacity was very, very high. Maybe even if it's a little diminished by past injuries, like I would look to see like his potential success this year. That's what I would be watching for in OTAs right now, is what does his low back look like? Because without being able to measure his ankle or knee in a sort of game time situation, low backs can be one of those things where you see flexibility in your low back. It talks about your hip flexor, it talks about your hamstring, it talks about your quad, it talks about even down to your calf in many cases. So that could be one I might look for. Again, if he's hurt, I don't know. I don't know. But there's, in terms of capability, he's got it. Like I'm still in.
And just to speak on it, you know, last year, Andrew Thomas had that hamstring injury. You know, the way you've talked about the importance of hamstring and the body working together, that can really hurt an offensive lineman, right? If one of those things in that kind of trunk of your body is messed up, that's going to throw everything off kilter, I guess, huh?
It's a really hard stance to play in. like offensive linemen, I mean, Sean now, like you see, like Sean's a really good example of it. I mean, Sean has lost a ton of weight and he's also in really good, like physical shape, right? Like I feel like right now he could probably like play basketball for like an entire afternoon and kick a lot of people's bums who he might not have been able to do that with when he had on more weight because he needed to protect Eli Manning, right? So like, now it's just it's a different use case that it's a very hard set of like the guys who do a lot of yoga tend to be in good shape. Now, again, what kind of yoga, this is a different thing, but like, being able to get their hamstrings, their calves, their hip flexors, their groins, their abs, like all of it, right? Like it's a hard stance to play out of.
Absolutely. All right. Final question. I did not ask you to prepare for this. So if you don't have no idea what the answer is, just say it and it's fine.
It's fine.
We saw a report a couple weeks ago that the NFL in the preseason was going to test the not using chains and using the electronic placement of the ball. For us people that are not, Boston College and Northwestern graduates, can you explain to me how that's going to work?
I don't know. I mean, I do know what they mean, what the intentionality is, I mean, there's already chips right now in everyone, the RFID chips are in everyone's shoulders. That's how we get the next gen stats.
Right.
Like it's basically the way that the technology works is it's like your GPS tracker, right? Like it tells you where people are relative to each other. It would be very easy then to use that same technology in all of the equipment that is involved in the game. It wouldn't change the weight of the ball, like nothing would be changed. It would be more accurate. I do think it's, testing it out in preseason and off, like before there's going to be problems. I mean, maybe it doesn't capture each snap, maybe whatever, how does it work when the ball gets crushed too much or what, you know what I mean? Like you're using different balls, remember, because we don't use just one ball in a game, we use many balls in a game. So, it's a very interesting use case, but I do actually like it because I think that the less opportunity for human error. Now, you remember I'm a Lions fan. So like there's some Cowboys hate that I'm exacting. We're going to exact revenge, on the Cowboys, which I know that Giants fans also will like, but
we're okay with that. We're
right. Like,
okay.
That whole, like, did someone, whatever, but like, does something cross the plane? Like, when did it happen to, like, there's a lot of human error involved in football. And if we could get something as simple as where the ball is on the field, right, with technology, that would free up all of the refs to be able to focus on harder questions as well.
Yeah, because look, I know they're having trouble with the automated strike zone in the minor leagues in baseball. Like it has been perfect, right? That's why they haven't put it in there yet. And I guess the only question I'd have, and maybe you don't have the answer to this, or you do, how would they be able to figure out where the ball is when the player's knee hits? So it's obviously easy to know where the ball is on the field, right? But how do they then sync that up with where the ball is when the knee or the elbow or the calf or whatever it is hits the ground and the play's dead? So how would that get lined up where it syncs and you know exactly where to put the ball?
I think the idea would be, and I asked a very similar question. I think the idea then is that they would use the video feed and the time sync would go with the video feed. So you're saying at, let's pretend it's a 1 o'clock game, right? At like 1:06 and 43 seconds and whatever, hundredths of a second, it's this. And this is where his knee hits. Where's the ball?
So that's something somebody upstairs would then have to communicate to the official on the field to spot it.
Yep. But I think that I still think that's better. Like,
no, I agree. I have no problem with that. I'm just trying to figure out what the mechanics would be.
Yeah, I think the mechanics would be something like a timestamp that matches the, because I still don't know. I don't believe the RFIDs would have enough of the chip would have enough granularity to know that it was on the ground. And I also think it would be stupid to spend the money to create a chip that would know it's on the ground, right? Like that's a huge waste of money. But I do know that the time syncing is already there because we time sync things for the next gen stats. So all you're really doing now is putting the same next gen. We have it in the ball already. Like we already know where the ball is. It's just being able to use it game speed without taking away some of the things we love about football, which is, if you're in the middle of using tempo and they're going to look at it for 2 inches and it's not even close to being a first down, like who cares, right? Like that's where you screw up the tempo and mess things up. But I think I believe it's probably do way better and way more good than bad.
Yeah, I agree. If it works, I think it'll be great. Cynthia, oh
Yeah.
my God, I cannot tell you how awesome this is.
This was so
how much
fun.
I learned. This was a
off-season
lot of
talks
fun.
are
I hope
fun.
you enjoyed it. Before we say
Love.
goodbye, just tell everybody what you're up to, what you want them to check out that you're doing. Promote
Yeah.
anything you want. The floor is yours.
Well, I mean, listen, I just told you, and like this is a preview, and this may be bad to talk about because then if it's something happens, I don't do it, it's going to suck. But I've been working on doing this rescue dog combine, and so hopefully next year you see it ahead of the NFL combine, which basically kind of takes like the idea of the puppy bowl, but extends it to, we got to run some drills. Where I also created, this is a really interesting use case for how I've been coding, which is to do like a matching system between a person and the type of dog or the dog that they should potentially adopt, which is, again, like I create like match.com for your dog, but only based on things that you might not say. Anyways, long story short is Rescue Dog Combine, in addition to taking a little time to reset with the league, watching OTAs and getting ready for, we'll be back in in a month, like we're back in action, you know? Training camp's going to be here before we know it.
Yeah, and then if these new rules are, we're not going to have any off season at all, and we're going to be working every month and every year, which is fantastic.
But we already do.
That is true. There really is no time
that'll
off.
just be the players too.
You're right, Cynthia. You're the best. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
Good luck with everything this summer, and look forward to the season. Thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
And everybody, thanks for watching us in the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. We'll see you next time, everybody.
Hey, have you ever used Cheapo Air?
For years, and I really like it. With Cheapo Air, you can book online, use their app, or even over the phone. They've got great prices on over 500 airlines and millions of accommodations. They're my go-to for travel planning. And if you join their Club Miles program, you can earn points to save on the cost of your travel. Book on the app, and you get double points.
Sounds like it's time I tried Cheapo Air.
Call Cheapo Air at 855-247-3279 or visit cheapoair.com/podcast.
Zero Foxtrot isn't just a brand, it's a way of life. Founded and operated by veterans, Zero Foxtrot's unique apparel and gear echoes the grit of the warrior culture. Zero Foxtrot dedicates itself to producing content, honoring the sacrifices of forgotten heroes of the past, and connecting history to the present. Embark on a journey with Zero Foxtrot today at zerofoxtrot.com. It's not merely our products, it's about the ethos that we embody. Rugged, resilient, and timeless.